On this Monday night, from refusal to reversal, the U.S. president allows Ukraine to strike Russia with American long-range missiles. The caveats for Ukraine and the warning from Russia. The return of the so-called Islamic State, why police say the terror group is gaining traction among young people in Canada.
People from the ages of 11, 12 to 16.
New digs where more homes are being built and where housing starts have slowed down. Plus, when a medieval monarch meets state-of-the-art technology.
We have torn the gaze of our inward eye.
How AI created a digital avatar of King Richard III.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Kremlin is warning if Ukraine uses long-range missiles on Russia, it will mark a serious escalation. In a major policy reversal, U.S. President Joe Biden has authorized Ukraine to use American-supplied long-range missiles, known as ATACMS, on targets inside Russia. The missiles are fired from the ground, and with them, Ukraine will be able to reach targets inside Kursk, Russian territory Ukraine now holds, plus target Russian military equipment and supply lines that have been out of reach until now. Is it a magic bullet for Ukraine after more than 2.5 years of brutal war? Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
2 deadly Russian missile attacks at opposite corners of Ukraine, with children among those killed. These are what Ukraine now hopes can help it fight back more strongly. For a year, Ukraine has already been using longer-range US-supplied ATACMS missiles against Russia on Ukrainian land. Now, after months of pleas from Kyiv, Washington has given Ukraine permission to use ATACMS inside Russian territory.
It hurts me to say that, but yes, many people who were killed by Russian strikes over the last couple of months could have been alive if these decisions would have happened earlier.
However, US officials have reportedly said ATACMS can only be used to hit Russia's Kursk region, where Ukraine wants to hold on to the 1,000 square kilometres it captured in August, and where North Korean troops are now thought to be supporting Russia.
It doesn't give us the permissions to do everything that we wanted, but it will give us another fighting chance in protecting ourselves.
That Russian land is likely an important bargaining chip ahead of what even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky suggests could be a negotiated settlement under a Trump administration. Vladimir Putin has previously said ATACMS hitting Russia would amount to NATO's direct involvement in the war. His foreign ministry spokesperson said Monday Russia's response to any ATACMS strikes will be adequate and significant.
There's only 8 weeks left of the Biden administration, and they think that Putin is not going to risk nuclear war right as Donald Trump is about to come into office.
The UK and France also supply the long-range Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. On Monday, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sidestepped questions on whether those can be used in Russia too. Donna?
All right, Redmond in London, thanks. Ukraine has long wanted the green light from the U.S. to use ATACMS to strike deep inside Russia. The Army tactical missile system made by Lockheed Martin is a ballistic missile capable of striking targets up to 300 kilometers away. They fly high into the atmosphere and come down at high speed, making them difficult to intercept. ATACMS are considered long range, but they can't reach as far as a cruise or intercontinental ballistic missile. Ukraine relies on the support of allies to fight Russia's invasion, and it's feared the clock is ticking. Donald Trump has promised to end the war when he becomes president in January. And today his son, Donald Trump Jr., tweeted that Biden is trying to get World War III going before his father takes office. At the G20 summit in Brazil, there appears to be no consensus among leaders to even talk about the war. David Akin reports.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau arrived at the opening G20 session ready to be an advocate for Ukraine and its president Volodymyr Zelensky. It's a role Trudeau has played at every major summit since Russia's invasion. PMO aide said Trudeau discussed Ukraine in every one-on-one meeting he had, like the one with Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni.
Whether it's conversations around complex global issues like the conflict in Ukraine and our standing so strongly against Russia's illegal invasion.
Other leaders wanted Ukraine on the main G20 agenda.
Tomorrow is day 1,000 of the conflict. That's 1,000 days of aggression from Russia and 1,000 days of sacrifice from Ukraine. So that is my clear message here. It's number one on my agenda.
But many other leaders here do not see Ukraine as a priority. And of course, one of those is G20 member Russia. Vladimir Putin is not here. He's still subject to an international arrest warrant for war crimes committed in Ukraine. But his foreign minister is here. And the host, Brazilian President Lula, or Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, well, he gets to set the agenda. And he wanted to focus on world hunger. But as U.S. President Joe Biden pointed out at the G20, ending the war in Ukraine would be directly related to improving global food security.
Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine led to the highest record food prices in all of history.
Trudeau and Biden had their own 30-minute private meeting. PMO aides said they spoke about the war in Ukraine. Still, this G20 meeting seems to end with no serious consensus about what to do in Ukraine. Now, the next time world leaders meet will be at the G7 next summer in Alberta. Justin Trudeau will be the host, and if the war in Ukraine is still on, he will certainly put that high up on the agenda. The wild card for that G7 will be the next American president, Donald Trump. Will he want to talk about Ukraine? Donna.
All right, David Akin, thank you. Israel's attacks against Hamas and Hezbollah ramped up today with airstrikes across Gaza and Lebanon. Israel targeted a neighborhood in central Beirut near government buildings and the UN headquarters. At least 5 people were killed, 24 wounded. And airstrikes across Gaza killed at least 8. First responders say an overnight strike on a tent sheltering displaced people in Han Yunis killed 2 children and their parents. A separate strike on a refugee camp in central Gaza killed at least 4 people. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says a convoy of 109 UN aid trucks carrying food was looted over the weekend. The drivers forced at gunpoint to unload the aid after passing through the Israeli-controlled Karim Shalom crossing. The UN says the total breakdown of civil order in Gaza makes it impossible environment to operate in.
We are in an environment where, local gangs, local families are struggling among each other to take control of any business or any activities taking place in the south.
The World Food Programme warns as winter approaches, the lack of food and other humanitarian supplies in Gaza will be catastrophic. In Ottawa, MPs showed solidarity for former Canadian Justice Minister and Jewish activist Irwin Cotler after reports he was targeted by Iran in an assassination plot.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, il y a eu consultation entre les partis, je pense.
MPs in the House of Commons unanimously supported a Bloc Québécois motion to recognize Cotler's work while condemning death threats by agents of a foreign regime. Today, the Globe and Mail reported that on October 26th, the RCMP warned Cotler that he faced imminent threat of assassination by Iran's agents within 48 hours. The source said authorities knew of 2 suspects. It's unclear if they were arrested or fled the country. The Public Safety Minister's office tells Global News it cannot comment on or confirm any specific RCMP operations for security reasons. Cotler has been under RCMP protection since the October 7th attacks on Israel last year. The terrorist movement known as ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, is back on the radar of authorities in Canada and around the world. For over a year, police say they've intercepted threats linked to ISIS, the vicious group that has staged horrific attacks. Tonight, in part 1 of our Global News investigation, Jeff Semple looks at how ISIS is attempting to reestablish itself by recruiting young people.
One of the world's most notorious terror groups is making a comeback. Security officials are warning the so-called Islamic State has gained footholds in Africa and Afghanistan, and anger over Western support for Israel in Gaza has fueled ISIS recruitment.
It definitely has assisted the Islamic State in being able to sell its message.
2 Ottawa teens allegedly planned to bomb a pro-Israel rally on Parliament Hill last year. Police say they were in contact with ISIS overseas, and they, like many recent ISIS suspects, are young.
Increasingly, you're seeing people not just like 17 and 18, but people from like the ages of like 11, 12 to 16 in a way that we really hadn't seen before.
A Global News analysis found since the beginning of last year, at least 20 suspects have been arrested across Canada in connection with ISIS terror offenses. Around half of those suspects were under the age of 21. 6 were youth.
But we've certainly seen more prevalence of youth, being radicalized or even mobilizing, right, to violence.
The RCMP's head of national security says ISIS is exploiting social media and online gaming platforms to spread propaganda, radicalize, and recruit. Last year, police raided this home in Montreal after a tip from the FBI and arrested 18-year-old Mohammed Assel. His mother said he did not want to speak with us. But the teen admitted to police that they had reason to fear he would commit a terrorist act. He'd allegedly communicated online with an ISIS supporter in Italy. He was not criminally charged and released on a conditional peace bond. Another suspect, 20-year-old Zachariah Hussein from Calgary, recently pleaded guilty to sharing ISIS recruitment and bomb-making videos on TikTok and YouTube. Hussein also used online gaming platforms like this one to exchange messages. "I'm a member of ISIS," he wrote in June 2023. "Tomorrow my mission begins. It's Pride Month. I've been waiting." Police raided his home and found sophisticated bomb-making instructions and an ISIS flag.
It's a generation of where everybody does everything online, so that has helped ISIS maintain a virtual caliphate, if you wish.
But that digital footprint also makes ISIS suspects easier to track. Despite the number of terror plots, there has only been one recent attack in Canada that was allegedly ISIS-inspired, a stabbing on a bus in Surrey, BC.
The majority of the plots, even now, they're still uncovered before they happen.
But police say despite their efforts, the threat is increasing, and they're asking the public, including parents, to be on the lookout for signs of radicalization. Donna?
Jeff, thanks. And there is more about our investigation into the resurgence of ISIS and how it targets young people. You can find that on our website, globalnews.ca. Tomorrow, we'll look into the alarming number of cases linked to ISIS stemming from Alberta and the story of one couple who became involved with the terrorist group. In Minnesota, jury selection is underway in the trial of 2 men accused of smuggling migrants across the Canada-U.S. border. They're accused of being part of an operation to bring people from India to Canada. In January of 2022, a couple and their 2 young children died in a blizzard trying to cross into Manitoba from Minnesota. Their bodies were found just meters from the border. The 2 accused have pleaded not guilty to conspiracy to transport aliens and placing lives in jeopardy. In Halifax, police now say there is no evidence of foul play in the death of a Walmart employee. The body of 19-year-old Gursimran Kaur was found in a walk-in oven in the store's bakery department last month. According to the Maritime Sikh Society, Kaur's mother, who also worked at the store, was the one who discovered her body. That Walmart has remained closed since then. The push to build houses in Canada coming up. What's hampering construction of new homes in some cities and why? The need for more homes in Canada has been spelled out over and over again. Now, the latest numbers on home building reveal whether construction is keeping up with demand. In some cities, new builds are happening fast, but in the most expensive markets, the picture is not so bright. Mackenzie Gray reports.
It's been the focus of federal politicians of all stripes, getting more housing built, but so far in 2024, it just hasn't happened. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation show that from January to October of this year, essentially the same number of houses have been built as last year.
Housing supply depends as well, obviously, on the economy, on the local economy, and of course on demographics as well.
And those variables are showing significant shifts on where new housing is going up. Construction in Alberta, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada is on fire, with Edmonton, Calgary, and Halifax as the leaders. But in Canada's most expensive provinces, Ontario and BC, housing starts are down sharply. Toronto seeing a 21% drop, Vancouver down 18%.
Housing is too expensive and interest rates are too high in our largest urban centers for people to be able to afford. And that translates directly into builders not building.
And while interest rates are on the way down, they're not a silver bullet.
Falling interest rates are not going to be enough to move conditions back into being completely favorable. So we're going to see some tough times ahead in home building.
Which has led the federal government to implement a host of new measures, like taking the GST off purpose-built rentals, helping ensure new builds aren't substantially declining. But it will still put Canada far short of the additional 3.5 million units the CMHC says are needed by 2030 to restore affordability.
We do need considerable increase in supply. In the meantime, there are people that are starting to find themselves priced out of markets.
And it's not just renters who find themselves being priced out. Another CMHC report warns that mortgage delinquencies continue to climb off pandemic lows, with a special concern on Vancouver and Toronto, Donna, where mortgage arrears could hit levels not seen in over a decade.
Okay, Mackenzie, thanks. Ahead, getting girls in the game, why they still face hurdles in sport. The Toronto Argonauts are Grey Cup champions once again. They beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers Sunday in what was a rematch of the 2022 final. The Bombers hope they can redeem themselves on home soil. Next year's Grey Cup is in Winnipeg. The PWHL is taking pro women's hockey to new cities. The league announced a series of games will be played in cities outside its markets during the second season. Quebec City, Vancouver, and 6 American cities were chosen. This could be a preview of the league's future. The PWHL wants to add as many as 2 new women's teams for the 2025-2026 season. Women's sport is getting unprecedented attention this year, but young girls still face barriers. A new report by Canadian Women in Sport found that while more girls are participating in organized sports, they still lag behind boys. Neetu Garcha explains why and what can be done to get girls more active.
Ready? There you go, nice.
These grade 8 girls are finding joy on the volleyball court, but for many like them, the path to participation comes with many barriers.
It's been a little difficult since, your family members sometimes judge you about it, and sometimes your friends just focus more on your career.
For menstrual cycles and barriers to sport, I feel you have those pains and a lot of mood changes and stuff. It's hard.
A new study from Canadian Women in Sport shows while more girls are playing in sports, they still lag behind boys. It found 63% of girls play weekly compared to 68% of boys. The study also finds 1 in 5 girls quit sports during their teen years, with body image concerns and comments about appearance playing a big role. Nearly half say their menstrual cycle affects their participation.
By the time girls are 16, half of them have left sport.
The report suggests action like access to private changing rooms, inclusive uniforms, limiting all comments about weight and appearance, and promoting body diversity.
I'm really surprised to hear that a lot of girls still think sports are for boys. As practitioners and coaches, it's our role to provide those women coaches, those women role models, pay for their time, train them.
3 in 5 girls say sports should be more affordable, offer programs tailored to them, celebrate women in sport, and feature more female role models.
I just like the positive attitudes, just getting support from my parents and the coaches and my teammates.
Now there's a new WNBA team coming, things like that. Things are changing.
They say as the game changes, so too must the playing field, with more support and opportunity to ensure fewer girls are on the sidelines. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Delta, BC.
The clarity and charity of the sun's licht.
Next, is this the voice of a medieval king? Shakespeare made him famous and countless actors have played him, but no one has heard the voice of King Richard III in more than 500 years. Now scientists, along with a voice coach, have used facial recognition technology and DNA analysis to recreate the speaking patterns of the medieval king, whose remains were found buried under a parking lot 12 years ago. Mike Armstrong explains how a king's voice has been brought back to life.
Shakespeare wrote the play Richard III more than 100 years after the king's death.
Now is the winter of our discontent.
3.5 centuries later, Hollywood gave its version. Well, now it's science's turn.
The clarity and charity of the sun's licht.
This digital avatar isn't an interpretation, it's a recreation.
when it is poured on the other heavenly bodies.
Basically as close as technology can get to the real thing. The Avatar is just the latest chapter in a project that started with a crazy-sounding theory. Archaeologists believe the misplaced remains of Richard III were under a parking lot in the town of Leicester.
2 shots this way, fellas.
Richard was crowned King of England in 1483 and died 3 years later at 32 years old. Well, they found bones, but the final confirmation they were Richard was Canadian DNA, a direct descendant from London, Ontario.
There's a direct female line of descendancy to my mother from Anne of York, Richard III's sister.
Based on the skull, scientists were able to reconstruct Richard's face. Using DNA, they were also able to determine things like skin and hair color. That was about as far as they could go for a time.
We were kind of just waiting for technology to catch up.
Professor Carolyn Wilkinson is a facial reconstruction expert and part of the multidisciplinary team that put the Avatar together.
By the girding on of the sword.
They looked at the pronunciation of words in his time, his education, where he grew up, and then using his anatomy came up with the pitch and tone of his voice.
And of the galled staff.
The only thing they don't have is whether he had any idiosyncrasies, like a strange way of moving his mouth.
That's the bit we're missing, is what's characteristic to him, and I don't know how we could possibly know that.
Finding the remains has helped experts rule out some of the myths about Richard. For example, he didn't have a limp or a hunchback. Much of that's based on Shakespeare.
I've determined to honor.
It is now being corrected by science. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.